The streets of Liana glistened under the steady rain, water rushing into potholes and swirling around the feet of a boy who had nowhere to go. Obinna, thin as a shadow, walked barefoot through the puddles, his trousers clinging to his legs, his shirt torn and soaked. Each drop that fell on his skin carried the weight of despair. But he pressed forward, step by step, his arms wrapped around himself for warmth. The city around him pulsed with life, indifferent to his suffering. Yellow Danfo buses still honked. Okada riders zigzagged between cars, their headlights cutting streaks through the misty night. On one corner, a pepper soup vendor shouted over the hiss of steam rising from his pot. The aroma of goat meat and hot spices curled through the air, stabbing Obinna with hunger so sharp it felt like a blade inside his stomach. His body trembled, not only from cold but from days of malnourishment. He was just 16, but his eyes had already seen more loss than most men twice his age. His mother had passed only months ago, a gentle woman who had struggled to sell vegetables in the market to keep him in school. After her burial, relatives had scattered like leaves in the Harmattan wind. Nobody wanted the burden of another mouth to feed. His father was a name, a ghost, someone who had disappeared before he could even form memories. Since then, Obinna had carried his own survival like a stone strapped to his back. The rain came heavier. Liana, in all its energy, offered no softness for a boy like him. From an open church window, he heard the voices of a choir rising above the storm, singing praises with drums and clapping hands. The sound should have comforted him, but it only reminded him of his mother, whose voice had always been the loudest in worship. He quickened his steps, blinking away tears. His body longed for shelter, any corner, any space that could shield him from the merciless rain. He searched with desperate eyes, scanning beneath bridges, behind shops, and through the cracks of closed kiosks. And then, almost hidden in the shadows of a mechanic's yard, he saw it, a bus. Or rather, what used to be a bus. Its yellow paint was faded, almost gray, with streaks of rust crawling over its surface. The windows were shattered, the doors crooked, its tires long deflated. To others, it was nothing more than scrap metal, forgotten by time. But to Obinna, it was a possible refuge. He stepped closer, hesitating as thunder cracked overhead. The mechanic's yard was deserted, the smell of oil and iron heavy in the air. With trembling hands, he pulled open the half-broken door. It groaned loudly, echoing through the yard. His heart raced, afraid someone would hear, but nobody came. Slowly, carefully, he climbed inside. The air within was damp, heavy with dust and mildew, but it was dry. That alone felt like a miracle. Torn seats lined the bus in crooked rows, their foam spilling out like wounded flesh. Obinna touched one, then sank down, curling his legs onto the seat. His bones ached, but at last, there was stillness. For the first time that night, he was not in the open rain. He pressed his back against the windowless frame and closed his eyes. The silence was thick, broken only by the patter of raindrops on the bus roof and the distant hum of traffic. He could almost imagine his mother's voice, soothing him to sleep. Slowly, his breathing steadied, the storm outside fading into background noise. Perhaps, he thought, he could finally rest. But then he froze. Through the darkness, he heard it. A sound too deliberate to be the wind, too steady to be an echo. The sound of breathing. Deep, calm, measured breathing. Someone else was inside. Obinna's eyes shot open, his body stiff as stone. His ears strained, certain that his mind was playing tricks. But no, the rhythm continued. Someone inhaled, exhaled, with the weight of a presence that had been waiting. Panic clawed at his chest. His first instinct was to bolt out of the bus, back into the storm, but his legs refused to move. He was trapped between his hunger, his exhaustion, and the unknown figure that lurked in the shadows. The darkness seemed to grow heavier, pressing on him, as though the bus itself had secrets hidden in its frame. His heart pounded so loud he feared the stranger could hear it. Then, from the very back of the bus, a voice broke the silence, low, calm, commanding. "Why are you here, boy?" The words cut through the air like thunder. From the shadows at the back of the broken bus, a figure shifted. The dim light from a flickering street lamp outside spilled through the shattered window, catching a gleam of gold on a man's wrist. Slowly, he stepped forward. His shoes were polished leather, untouched by the mud outside. His trousers were neatly pressed, his shirt crisp, his presence almost out of place in such a ruin. Chief Kenechukwu. He was in his late 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with a quiet authority that needed no introduction. His face was stern yet calm, his movements deliberate. On his wrist was a timepiece so expensive it could feed Obinna for years. Its glass caught the faint light, throwing a glimmer across the cracked bus ceiling. The contrast was surreal. Wealth, elegance, and power set against rust, dust, and decay. Obinna froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He thought he had stumbled into safety, but now it felt like danger. Who was this man? Why was he here, of all places? The boy's first thought was to flee, but his body was too weary, his legs too heavy. The man's voice came again, calm but carrying a weight that pressed against Obinna's skin. "Why are you here, boy?" Obinna's lips trembled. I was only looking for somewhere to rest. I didn't mean to disturb anybody." His voice was thin, swallowed by the vast silence of the bus. The man's expression did not soften, yet it did not harden either. He studied the boy as though weighing something invisible. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. "Where are your parents?" The question struck Obinna in the chest. He lowered his eyes, his throat tightening. For a moment, he wanted to lie, to invent a story that would protect him from pity or rejection. But the truth pressed forward, raw and heavy. "My mother," he began, pausing as the word itself threatened to break him. "She died, not long ago. She was all I had. And my father—" He shook his head slowly, struggling to form the rest. "He left, long ago. I never knew him." The man did not react immediately. He only watched, his eyes unreadable, his silence thick. It was not the silence of dismissal, but of listening, of weighing every syllable the boy uttered. Obinna felt exposed, as though the darkness could no longer hide him. His chest ached from more than hunger. The pain of abandonment, the sting of rejection by relatives, the loneliness of wandering the streets, it spilled into the stillness. For the first time he spoke of it aloud, even if only in fragments. The man did not offer pity. He did not rush to comfort. He simply listened, with the stillness of someone who had carried burdens of his own. When Obinna's words faded into silence, the man's eyes flickered briefly toward the window. Obinna followed his gaze and saw a sleek black SUV parked just beyond the gate of the mechanic's yard. Its tinted windows reflected the rain-soaked streetlights. A driver sat inside, motionless, waiting. Obinna blinked. Confusion surged in him. This man, dressed in elegance, with such a car and a driver, could be resting in any mansion or hotel across Liana. Why then was he here, sitting in a rusted bus, in the middle of the night? The boy's fear mixed with curiosity. His hunger now battled with questions larger than his own survival. Who exactly was this man? As if reading his thoughts, the man finally spoke again, his voice steady but tinged with something deeper. "This bus," he said, sweeping his gaze around the decayed interior, "is not just scrap metal to me. It holds meaning." Obinna tilted his head, confused. "There was a night," the man continued, his tone softer now, "many years ago, when I too had no place to go, when decisions pressed against me like stones, and the world gave me no mercy. On that night, in a bus like this, I made a choice that changed everything." He paused, his eyes locked on the boy's. "And that is why I am here." The revelation stunned Obinna. He searched the man's face for any sign of mockery, but there was none. Only calm conviction. The boy's hunger seemed to fade, replaced by the weight of the moment. The man stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. His eyes, sharp yet reflective, scanned Obinna's thin frame, his trembling hands, his torn clothes. It was as if he was not merely looking at him, but into him, searching, measuring, deciding. Obinna swallowed hard. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rain outside. Finally, the man leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping low, almost like a secret. "You don't know it yet," Chief Kenechukwu whispered, each word deliberate, "but this night will rewrite your future." The air thickened. The broken bus, once just a shelter of rust and dust, became something else, a place of destiny, of crossroads, of beginnings that neither of them could yet name. And Obinna, barefoot and trembling, knew that his life had just shifted in a way he could not understand. The broken bus was silent again, the rain outside forming a curtain of sound against the roof. Chief Kenechukwu stood straighter, his presence filling the space, while Obinna remained seated, his eyes wide, his heart racing in confusion. The man's words echoed inside him. "This night will rewrite your future." Chief reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a small leather wallet. With deliberate calm, he slid out a crisp 5,000 note and extended it toward the boy. The light caught on the clean paper, making it almost glow against Obinna's trembling hands. "Take it," Chief said, his tone neither warm nor cold, simply commanding. "There is a buka across the street. Buy food for both of us. Let us eat." Obinna froze. His stomach tightened, not from hunger alone, but from disbelief. Never in his life had he held such money in his hands. Not when his mother was alive, not in the market stalls, not even in the fleeting help of neighbors. He stared at the note as if it might vanish the moment he touched it. His hands shook as he finally accepted it. The paper felt heavier than its weight, like a burden, a temptation, a test. His mind erupted in a war of voices. "Run, Obinna. With this money you can buy bread for days. You can escape this stranger, this bus, this uncertainty." But another voice, softer, pressed against his chest. "He trusted you. What if this is a chance? What if this is the moment you've been praying for?" Obinna rose slowly, his legs stiff, and moved toward the crooked door of the bus. Rain splashed his face as soon as he stepped outside, soaking him anew. The world beyond seemed louder, harsher, now that he carried the fragile weight of trust. The buka across the street was still open, its smoky air carrying the smell of fried plantain, beans, and jollof rice. The owner, a heavy-set woman with a wrapper tied across her waist, looked up as Obinna approached. She frowned at his drenched clothes and shivering body but said nothing. He placed the money on the counter, his voice uncertain. "Please, rice, beans, and plantain. For two." The woman raised her brows at the crisp note, perhaps doubting it belonged to him. Still, she took it and gave him steaming plates packed into plastic bowls, the heat warming his hands instantly. As she returned his change, Obinna's eyes lingered on the extra cash in his palm. For a second, temptation burned again. Keep it, run away, feed yourself for weeks. But then he remembered the man's eyes in the bus, piercing, unreadable, yet strangely expectant. Something inside him refused to betray that gaze. He clutched the bowls tight and crossed back into the rain. When he stepped into the bus once more, Chief was waiting exactly where he had left him, arms folded, his sharp eyes following every movement. Obinna approached, placed the food carefully on the seat between them, and then extended the remaining change. Chief looked at the money, then back at the boy. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the corners of his lips moved in what could be mistaken for the beginning of a smile. He took nothing from the boy's hand. Instead, he gestured at the bowls. "Sit. Eat." Obinna sat down, and for the first time in years, he did not eat alone. The warm scent of jollof rice filled the broken bus, mixing strangely with the rust and dust of its abandoned frame. The boy ate quickly at first, hunger guiding his every motion, but then he slowed, glancing at the man beside him. Chief Kenechukwu ate with the same grace he carried in his presence, measured, calm, deliberate. Their worlds were galaxies apart, yet in that moment, two plastic bowls bridged them. The boy from the streets and the man of immense wealth shared the simplest act of humanity, a meal. Between mouthfuls, Obinna stole glances at the man's face, trying to read him. Why was he here? Why him? What kind of rich man chose to sit in a rusted bus when he had an SUV waiting outside? As if sensing his thoughts, Chief finally spoke, his deep voice steady. "Most wealthy men," he said, setting his spoon down for a moment, "do not understand the value of integrity. They measure men by money, by appearance, by family names. But you, boy, you had every reason to run. You did not. That is rare." The words sank into Obinna's bones. Integrity. Rare. No one had ever spoken of him in such terms before. To most, he was just a burden, a stray, an unwanted reminder of poverty. But this man saw something else. For the first time, Obinna felt the heavy cloak of shame around him loosen. Just a little. He looked down at his half-eaten food, his throat tightening. I only wanted to do the right thing. Chief studied him quietly, his eyes softening almost imperceptibly. Then, without another word, he reached into his pocket again, this time, not for money, but for his phone. He dialed a number, his tone curt but calm. "Prepare a room," he said, his gaze still locked on Obinna. A pause, then he added, "I've found him." The words hung in the air like a prophecy. Obinna, clutching his plastic spoon, felt the world tilt beneath him. He did not yet know what those words meant, but deep inside, he sensed the truth. This was the beginning of something far greater than he could ever imagine. The rain had calmed into a drizzle by the time dawn began to brush the Liana sky with shades of pale gold. The mechanic's yard was quiet, save for the dripping sound of water falling from rooftops. Inside the broken bus, Obinna stirred from restless sleep, his head heavy from exhaustion. He rubbed his eyes and turned only to see Chief Kenechukwu already awake, sitting upright with the composed stillness of a man who carried the world on his shoulders. "Come," Chief said, rising to his feet with a commanding presence that brooked no refusal. "It's time." Obinna blinked in confusion. Time? For what? His voice cracked, uncertain, still trapped between fear and disbelief. Chief stepped out of the bus, adjusting his suit jacket as though the night had left no mark on him. Outside, the sleek black SUV waited, its polished body gleaming under the early light. The driver stood by the door, head bowed, ready to serve. "Get in," Chief instructed. Obinna hesitated. His instincts screamed caution. The streets had taught him that nothing came free, that trust was a dangerous gamble. Yet, hunger gnawed at him, and the memory of sharing food with this man still lingered like a fragile ember of hope. Slowly, reluctantly, he followed, climbing into the SUV. The moment he sank into the leather seat, his breath caught. The vehicle smelled of expensive cologne and fine polish. The seats hugged him like a softness he had never known. As the car pulled away, Liana stretched before him, streets buzzing with hawkers balancing trays on their heads, early commuters hurrying to work, the hum of generators already filling the air. But then, as the SUV turned past Lekki and crossed the bridge into Banana Island, Obinna's world shifted. Glass mansions rose like giants, their walls gleaming under the morning sunday. Iron gates taller than palm trees, guarded compounds lined with trimmed hedges and fountains. Infinity pools glistened beside houses that looked more like palaces than homes. Exotic cars purred down the quiet, tree-lined roads. Obinna's mouth parted in awe. He pressed his face slightly to the tinted window, his eyes devouring a world that had always been whispered about but never seen. He felt like a trespasser in a land of dreams. The SUV finally rolled into a grand estate with wrought iron gates that swung open at their approach. The driveway stretched wide, lined with sculpted hedges and marble statues. At the end stood a mansion that seemed carved out of wealth itself, glass walls reflecting the sky, gold chandeliers glittering inside, marble staircases spiraling toward high ceilings. As the car stopped, Obinna hesitated again, gripping the door handle but too nervous to open it. Chief's voice broke the silence. "This is home. Home." The word struck him. For so long, he had wandered without one, carrying only the memory of his mother's cramped market stall. Now, this towering palace was before him, and he could hardly breathe. The driver opened his door, and Obinna stepped out, his bare feet pressing onto polished tiles warmer than the cold, rain-soaked ground he had known. Staff hurried forward, maids in uniforms, a butler with gloved hands, a chef in white attire. Their eyes flickered toward Obinna, confusion masked behind politeness. Who was this ragged boy trailing behind their master? Chief ignored their stares. He led Obinna inside, his shoes clicking against the marble floors. Obinna gasped. Gold chandeliers dripped light from the ceiling, casting a glow across intricate rugs and walls lined with fine art. A grand piano sat in the corner, untouched but glimmering like a jewel. Beyond the glass walls, an infinity pool stretched into the horizon, as though the water met the sky. Obinna felt dizzy. His body, dirty and worn from the streets, seemed out of place in such perfection. Chief gestured toward a staircase. "Upstairs. They will prepare you." The boy followed the staff nervously. Soon, he found himself in a room larger than any he had ever seen, with a bed so wide it could hold his entire market stall from years ago. He was handed clean clothes, soft towels, and ushered into a bathroom where warm water flowed from taps shaped like gold. When the hot water touched his skin, Obinna gasped. For years, his baths had been cold water fetched from buckets. Now, warmth soaked into his bones, washing away not just dirt but fragments of shame. He dressed in new clothes that fit snugly and returned to find a table laid with food: yam porridge, grilled chicken, akara, fresh juice. He ate carefully at first, then hungrily, until his stomach, long forgotten, remembered what fullness felt like. Later, Chief appeared at the doorway, watching him silently. "You'll stay here for a while," he said firmly. "Watch, learn." But the house was not as welcoming as its beauty. Whispers slithered through its halls. Staff exchanged glances behind his back. Some relatives, visiting that day, eyed him with thinly veiled disdain. One voice cut louder than the rest: Adadora, Chief's only daughter. She was strikingly beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that glittered with arrogance. She looked Obinna up and down, her lips curling into a smirk. "So this is the stray you brought in?" she said, her words laced with venom. "Father, are we running a charity now?" The words pierced Obinna deeper than she could imagine. He lowered his gaze, ashamed, while Chief merely glanced at her without responding. But the wound remained. That night, long after the mansion quieted, Obinna lay awake in the massive bed that felt too big, too foreign. His thoughts swirled with hunger for belonging, fear of rejection, and wonder at what his future could possibly hold here. But as he drifted toward sleep, a shadow appeared at his door. A relative, face sharp with malice, leaned in and whispered coldly, "This house eats strangers alive. Leave before it swallows you." Obinna's blood ran cold. The days that followed were unlike anything Obinna had ever known. Each morning, he awoke to the soft hum of the mansion coming alive, maids sweeping marble floors, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the kitchen, the rhythmic splash of water against the infinity pool. Yet despite the beauty, he carried with him the unease of a boy who did not belong. Chief Kenechukwu wasted no time. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the study, Chief gestured for Obinna to sit across from him. A long mahogany desk stretched between them, stacked with books, ledgers, and tablets. "Knowledge," Chief began, adjusting his glasses, "is the true currency of wealth. Money without understanding is like water poured into sand. It disappears." Obinna nodded silently, his palms pressed nervously against his knees. Chief opened a book on real estate, pointing to diagrams of land investments, then shifted to a tablet screen, showing stock charts and currency markets. He spoke not like a teacher lecturing a child, but like a mentor training a future partner. Obinna struggled at first. Terms like equity, leverage, and dividends danced above his comprehension. Yet he listened with fierce concentration, memorizing not only the words but the rhythm of Chief's confidence. His hunger for survival sharpened into hunger for knowledge, but outside these study sessions, the house was a battlefield. At the dining table, where silver cutlery gleamed under chandeliers, Obinna often fumbled using the wrong fork for salad, holding a knife awkwardly, sipping juice too quickly. Adawara and her cousins seized every mistake like hawks circling prey. "Bush boy," Adawara sneered one evening, her laughter sharp as glass. "Do they even teach you how to sit on a chair where you're from?" Her cousins chuckled, their voices carrying across the table. Obinna's ears burned with shame. He lowered his gaze, too proud to beg for acceptance, yet too determined to let humiliation break him. Chief, seated at the head of the table, remained silent but observant. His eyes flickered toward Obinna with a calm that seemed to say, "Endure, it will shape you." And so Obinna endured. He watched how forks were held, how words were chosen, how laughter was timed. He absorbed everything like a sponge, storing away lessons not only from Chief, but from the very people who mocked him. Weeks later, Chief called him into the study again, his voice firm but encouraging. "It is time," he said. "You cannot remain only here. You will attend school. Proper education must refine what I am teaching you." Obinna's chest tightened. The thought of stepping into a classroom again after years away filled him with both hope and fear. Soon, he was enrolled in an elite private academy in Victoria Island, where the children of governors, CEOs, and foreign diplomats filled the classrooms. On his first day, he arrived in a crisp uniform, the fabric still stiff from newness. Whispers followed him the moment he walked in. "Isn't that the busboy?" Student murmured, smirking. "The one Chief Kenechukwu picked off the streets?" Laughter rippled. Imagine, from Danfo to designer shoes. The ridicule stung, sharper than any hunger pang he had ever felt. Yet Obinna straightened his shoulders, refusing to shrink. He remembered Chief's words. Knowledge is currency. If this was the price of learning, he would pay it. At first, lessons overwhelmed him. His peers spoke polished English, referenced foreign vacations, and wielded gadgets he had never touched. But Obinna burned with determination. He stayed behind after class, scribbling notes furiously. He asked teachers for extra explanations. At night, while others slept, he read by the faint light of a bedside lamp, fighting exhaustion with sheer will. Slowly, the tide began to turn. In mathematics, he solved problems quicker than some of his wealthiest peers. In economics, his sharp insights surprised even his teachers. One day, during a business studies presentation, he explained the struggles of market women and linked them to broader concepts of supply and demand. The class went silent, then burst into applause. The nickname busboy began to lose its sting. Some classmates still mocked him, but others started to watch him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Teachers praised his discipline, noting his hunger for knowledge surpassed that of students born into privilege. Back at the mansion, Chief noticed the change. His questions during their study sessions grew harder, his tone more challenging, as if testing how much weight Obinna could now carry. The boy's answers grew sharper, his confidence steadier. One evening the household gathered for dinner in the glittering dining hall. Relatives filled the long table, their conversations loud and dismissive. Adadora sat opposite Obinna, her eyes fixed on him with the same disdain as always. But as the meal progressed, Chief cleared his throat. His voice, calm yet firm, carried above the chatter. "From today," he declared, setting down his glass, "Obinna is not merely a guest in this house, he is my protégé." The words struck like thunder, gasps rippled around the table, forks clattered against plates, relatives exchanged sharp glances. Adaora's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock before curving into a scowl. Obinna sat frozen, his pulse racing. Protégé. The word wrapped around him like a cloak, heavy but powerful. He had longed for recognition, yet the weight of it terrified him. He could feel the room shift, the admiration of a few, the resentment of many, the fire in Adadora's glare. The battle lines were being drawn, and he had just been thrust into the center. The world Chief Kenechukwu opened to Obinna was one few ever glimpsed. It was not just the glitter of mansions or the flash of luxury cars, it was the hidden engine that powered them all, the world of wealth and influence. Obinna often sat quietly behind Chief in conference rooms lined with glass walls, where billionaires, politicians, and investors debated numbers that stretched into billions of naira. The air in those rooms was thick with power, sharpened by the scent of imported cigars, and the quiet confidence of men who believed they owned not just property, but destinies. He listened as Chief spoke with calm authority about real estate acquisitions, banking reforms, oil investments, and digital startups. Sometimes, Chief leaned back in his chair, allowing silence to do the work of intimidation. Other times, his words sliced through arguments with surgical precision. Obinna watched, awed, realizing that wealth was not merely about having money, it was about strategy, alliances, and the ability to command respect without raising your voice. But not everyone respected Chief's decision to bring Obinna into his orbit. At a meeting one afternoon, a rival businessman smirked as he eyed the boy seated behind Chief. "So this is the protégé?" he asked mockingly. Street boy?" "Chief, you are turning your empire into a charity." Laughter rippled around the room. Obinna's face burned, but Chief did not flinch. He simply replied, "Greatness does not ask where you slept last night, it asks where you are going tomorrow." The room fell silent. Still, the whispers grew. At one grand gala hosted in Victoria Island, Obinna lingered by a marble column, watching businessmen and their wives glide across the ballroom floor in glittering attire. He heard them when they thought he was too far to listen. "That's him, the busboy Chief is grooming." A charity project. A distraction. He'll never survive in this world. Chief is wasting his time. The words sliced through him like knives. He clenched his fists, resisting the urge to run. Instead, he swallowed the pain and made a silent vow. I will not only belong here, I will excel here. His chance came sooner than expected. During a tense property negotiation, Chief and his team faced ruthless rivals determined to cheat them out of millions. The discussions circled endlessly, numbers flying across the table, legal jargon twisting like a maze. Obinna sat in silence, but his sharp eyes scanned the documents laid out before them. Then he saw a clause buried deep in the fine print, overlooked by everyone. It created a loophole that tilted the deal heavily against Chief. Obinna hesitated, his heart pounding, then leaned toward Chief and whispered his discovery. Chief's eyes flickered with surprise. He reread the section, then turned back to the table, his voice calm but edged with steel. Gentlemen, you seem to have left out a detail. Clause 14b. Does not align with our prior agreement. The room froze. The rivals exchanged nervous glances. Within minutes, the tide shifted. What had been a losing battle became a decisive victory. Chief secured the property at a price that saved him billions of naira. As the meeting ended, Chief glanced at Obinna with something rare in his eyes: approval. From that day, he began relying on him more, not only in study sessions but in the very heart of business negotiations. Word spread quickly. Staff whispered about the boy who had saved a billion naira deal. Some admired him, but others, especially Chief's relatives, boiled with envy. To them, Obinna was still an outsider, a busboy who had no right to rise so high. Adaora, in particular, grew colder. She would pass him in the hallways with narrowed eyes, her silence heavier than her words. At family gatherings, she watched him carefully, as though waiting for him to stumble. The media soon caught the scent of the story. Articles began circulating in society magazines. Who is Chief Kenechukwu's mysterious ward? Is he a hidden son, a street orphan, or the heir of a secret affair? Rumors spread like wildfire, feeding the curiosity of Liana high society. Some praised Chief for his generosity, others accused him of madness. Obinna tried to ignore it, burying himself in study and work. But everywhere he turned, whispers followed him. Even at school, students mocked him with new fuel. Busboy billionaire in training, they jeered. Still, he endured. Every insult became fuel. Every doubt sharpened his resolve. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he stepped into the mansion's grand hallway, exhausted but determined. Adaora was waiting, her arms folded, her eyes blazing with unspoken hostility. She took a slow step toward him, her voice low and sharp. "You think you're winning," she said, her words laced with venom. "But you don't understand what you've walked into." Her glare pierced him, heavy with a warning that felt larger than her disdain. For the first time, Obinna realized the truth. This was not merely about wealth or acceptance. He had stepped into a world where envy, betrayal, and silent wars thrived behind the glitter of chandeliers. And the battles ahead would be more dangerous than the hunger he once fought on the streets. The mansion had grown quieter in recent weeks. The once commanding presence of Chief Kenechukwu, who filled boardrooms and dinner tables with authority, was now confined to his bedroom. Long days of travel, endless negotiations, and the pressure of carrying an empire had caught up with him. Exhaustion pulled him down like a heavy cloak, leaving him temporarily bedridden. For Obinna, the change was startling. The man who had seemed unshakable now lay in silence, his strength dimmed. But instead of stepping back, Obinna found himself drawn closer. Every evening, he carried trays of food into the dimly lit room, arranging pillows and adjusting the curtains. Often, Chief would wave away the food untouched and ask instead for conversation. It was in those hushed nights that Obinna began to see fragments of a man hidden beneath the billionaire's exterior. Chief would speak slowly, his voice roughened by fatigue. "When I was your age," he murmured one evening, staring at the ceiling, "I thought money would erase every scar. I believed success would silence the ghosts, but wealth only makes them whisper louder." Obinna listened, though he did not fully understand. "Everyone sees the empire," Chief continued, "but behind it are mistakes, choices I wish I could undo, people I wish I hadn't lost." The words hung heavy in the air, laden with a sorrow Chief rarely revealed. Obinna wanted to ask questions, to press for details, but the weight of respect held him silent. Outside the bedroom, however, the mansion churned with unease. Relatives gathered in hushed corners, their voices sharp with fear. "What if he changes his will?" One cousin whispered. "That boy is too close to him." "The staff listened to him already," another complained. "This is dangerous." Obinna could feel their eyes on him wherever he went. The air thickened with suspicion. Yet, in Chief's absence, decisions still needed to be made. Deliveries to the house, appointments to be rescheduled, instructions for the staff. Obinna found himself stepping into the role by necessity. At first, he only carried out small tasks, but gradually the staff began seeking him out for direction, and to their surprise, he proved reliable. Where other relatives barked orders, Obinna spoke with calm respect. Where others flaunted authority, he rolled up his sleeves to help. Soon, the gardeners greeted him warmly. The maids smiled when he passed, and the butler addressed him with the same deference he gave the family. But with this growing respect came deeper resentment. Some relatives muttered that the boy was overstepping, that Chief's kindness was blinding him. Adaora, who had long scorned Obinna, began watching him differently. One night, she entered her father's room to find Obinna reading aloud from the Bible at Chief's bedside. She lingered at the doorway, her eyes narrowing, though her expression was not as cruel as before. Later, she confronted him. "Why are you always here?" she asked, her tone sharper than the question itself. "Because he needs me," Obinna answered simply. Adaora folded her arms. "Or because you need what he'll give you." Her words stung, but Obinna held her gaze. "I don't need his money," he said firmly. "I need his wisdom." For the first time, Adaora faltered. Something softened in her eyes, though she quickly turned away. The mansion was divided. Some staff and a few relatives began to see Obinna as different, not spoiled by entitlement but shaped by hunger and resilience. Others saw him as a threat, a shadow creeping too close to the center of power. The tension simmered beneath the glittering chandeliers, ready to ignite at the slightest spark. One night, as the rain tapped softly against the glass windows, Chief motioned for Obinna to lean close. His voice was faint, but his eyes still carried the weight of command. "Never forget where you started," he whispered. "That is your strength. Do not let this house or this wealth erase it." The words burrowed into Obinna's heart, heavier than any inheritance. He nodded, though his throat ached too much to speak. After Chief drifted into sleep, Obinna quietly rose and began to tidy the room. His eyes wandered to the mahogany drawers by the bedside. They were half open, papers spilling slightly over the edge. He hesitated, then gently pushed them closed until something caught his eye. A photograph. It had slipped halfway out, yellowed at the edges. Obinna bent and picked it up. In the dim light, he saw Chief, much younger, standing beside a woman. She was beautiful, with eyes that seemed to pierce through the photograph itself. Her smile was gentle, yet hauntingly familiar. Obinna's breath caught in his throat. The curve of her face, the arch of her eyebrows, it mirrored someone he had seen before. His heart thudded. It looked like his mother. The photograph trembled in his hand as questions roared in his mind. Could it be? Was this coincidence, or something more? Before he could gather his thoughts, footsteps echoed in the hallway. He quickly slipped the photograph back into the drawer, his chest pounding. But the image burned into his memory, refusing to fade. The photograph refused to leave Obinna's mind. Every time he closed his eyes, the woman's face appeared soft, familiar, haunting. It looked too much like his mother to be coincidence. But what was she doing in a picture beside Chief Kenechukwu, decades younger, his hand resting lightly at her back, as though they shared a closeness unspoken? From that moment, Obinna carried a storm inside him. Gratitude weighed on one side. This man had lifted him from the streets, clothed him, fed him, given him a world he never dared dream of. But curiosity gnawed from the other side, sharp and relentless. Had my mother once known him? Was I here by fate or by blood? His restlessness did not go unnoticed. During the breakfast in the glittering dining hall, Obinna sat silent, lost in thought while the clatter of silver cutlery filled the air. Adaora's sharp eyes, always trained on him, narrowed further. "What are you hiding?" she asked suddenly, her voice slicing through the chatter. Obinna looked up, startled. Nothing. Liar, she shot back, her chin lifting defiantly. You've been walking around like a ghost. What did you see? Their exchange drew the attention of cousins and staff alike, whispers rippling across the table. Obinna clenched his jaw, refusing to answer. Edaora pressed harder, her suspicion burning. Did you find something? Something about him? About you? Anger flared inside Obinna. Why does it matter to you? He snapped, his voice low but sharp. The table went still. For a moment, the air between them crackled like lightning before rain. Edaora's lips parted, ready to strike back, but something faltered in her eyes. Instead of mockery, a strange softness lingered, as though his anger had revealed a depth she hadn't expected. Their clashes grew frequent in the days that followed. Arguments in hallways, sharp words over small matters. Yet beneath the heat of conflict, something else stirred a fragile bond, unspoken but undeniable. At times, Edaora seemed less hostile, her eyes lingering on him with curiosity rather than disdain. The lines between enemy and reluctant ally blurred. Meanwhile, gossip slithered through the mansion like smoke. Relatives whispered in corners, their voices hushed yet deliberate. Have you heard? The boy. They say he could be blood. It would explain why Chief favors him. If it's true, then everything inheritance, control, shifts. The rumors spread faster than wildfire, leaping beyond the mansion's walls. At business gatherings, Chief's rivals used the whispers like weapons. Ah, Chief, one rival chuckled during a luncheon, his tone dripping with sarcasm, raising hidden sons now? Very noble. But dangerous for your empire. Another leaned in with a smirk. They say street boys are unpredictable. Can you really build an empire on charity? Each word was designed to weaken Chief's credibility, to plant seeds of doubt among investors and allies. The name Obinna became both an emblem of curiosity and a tool of mockery. Back at the mansion, Obinna felt the weight of eyes everywhere he went. Some staff treated him with warmth, but others pulled away, as though proximity to him carried risk. Relatives avoided him in daylight but whispered about him at night. He began to feel unwelcome in the very place that had saved him, trapped between truth and loyalty. One evening, while pouring water at Chief's bedside, Obinna's restlessness spilled into words. Sir, he began hesitantly, why do people talk about me? Why do they say I could be family? Chief's eyes, weary but sharp, studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed deeply, leaning back against the pillows. Not every answer will give you peace, he said softly. The words were like a riddle. Obinna's chest tightened. He wanted clarity, not riddles. Yet Chief offered nothing more, only silence that stretched heavy between them. The mansion grew colder. Dinner conversations turned into battlegrounds of subtle jabs and veiled threats. Doors slammed. Voices rose in distant rooms. It was no longer simply a home, it had become a battlefield of suspicion and silent wars, with Obinna at its center. Even Edaora, once content to mock him, now approached differently. One night, she cornered him in the garden, the scent of jasmine thick in the air. Her eyes were fierce, her voice urgent. If you know something, tell me, because if you are who I think you are, everything changes. Obinna's throat tightened. He stared at her, torn between speaking and silence, truth and survival. In the end, he turned away, leaving her with questions burning hotter than his own. But he could no longer escape the storm inside him. Each passing day, the weight of suspicion pressed harder, the photograph of his mother and Chief whispering louder in his mind. Finally, one night, unable to bear it any longer, he entered Chief's study. The older man sat by the fireplace, a glass of wine untouched beside him, his face drawn with shadows. Obinna's voice shook as he spoke, but his words were clear, sharp, demanding. Who was my father? The room fell silent. Chief's hand froze mid-motion. The flames crackled, throwing gold light across the walls, but the weight of the question darkened the air. Obinna's heart pounded as he waited, knowing this moment could unravel everything. The silence in Chief's study stretched until it felt unbearable. The fire cracked in the hearth, casting restless shadows against the glass walls. Chief's eyes, sharp yet tired, lingered on Obinna's face. The boy's question, Who was my father? Hung in the air like a weight that refused to fall. At last, Chief exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling as though each breath carried the burden of decades. His voice, when it came, was low and deliberate. Your father, he said, pausing for a moment too long, was a man with nothing to give. Obinna's heart dropped. He searched Chief's face for detail, for truth, for something to ease the ache. But Chief's expression was unreadable, his words clipped, final. It felt like a door slammed shut in his face. The boy's throat tightened. Something in the way Chief had spoken told him there was more, something hidden beneath the blunt dismissal. Yet Chief offered nothing else, only silence, only distance. Obinna felt crushed. The storm of suspicion, the whispers in the mansion, the photograph that burned in his memory, all of it demanded answers. Instead, he was handed a fragment, sharp enough to wound but not enough to heal. That night, he withdrew into himself. He avoided the study, ignored the household chatter, and carried his solitude like a cloak. At meals, he sat in silence. During study sessions, his answers were short, his eyes downcast. Even when Chief tried to draw him in with casual remarks, Obinna's replies were cold, distant. The bond that had once held them began to fray. One evening, unable to bear the weight of his own thoughts, Obinna slipped into the garden. The air was heavy with the scent of hibiscus, the night sky stretched wide above him. He sat on a stone bench, his hands trembling, his heart breaking with unspoken questions. Adaora found him there. For once, she did not approach with arrogance or disdain. Her steps were soft, her face calm, her eyes searching. She sat beside him without asking, the silence between them thick but not hostile. You've been different, she said finally, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it. Obinna didn't answer at first. Then, with a sigh that carried his exhaustion, he admitted, I asked him about my father. He said he was a man with nothing to give. Adaora's eyes softened. For a long moment, she said nothing, simply studying the grief carved into his features. Then she spoke words that pierced through the fog in his chest. Blood doesn't always define family, she said gently. Choices do. Obinna turned to her, surprised. Her gaze was steady, her tone without mockery. It was the first time she had spoken to him without walls. Her words lingered like balm, soothing yet unsettling. In that moment, a fragile bond grew between them. No longer adversaries, they became something closer to confidants. Their late-night conversations deepened, sharing fragments of childhood, secrets of fear and longing. Slowly, unspoken emotions stirred between them, fragile but undeniable. But even as his heart found unexpected solace in Adaora, the world around them grew darker. Chief's empire began to shake under the weight of rival attacks. Business partners withdrew, emboldened by whispers that his health was failing and his household divided. Deals slipped through his fingers. Properties once secure faced legal disputes. Rivals, sensing weakness, circled like predators. Obinna, once at Chief's side in boardrooms and negotiations, began pulling back. His resentment, his unanswered questions, his broken trust, they built a wall between him and the man who had once been his anchor. He busied himself with school, with books, with silence. Whenever business matters arose, he avoided them, leaving Chief to fight alone. Yet Chief watched him. Privately, quietly, his eyes followed the boy with sorrow. At dinners, when Obinna stared at his plate instead of speaking, Chief's gaze lingered. In the study, when the boy slipped past without entering, Chief's sighs deepened. He never spoke of it, but the distance cut him deeply. The mansion itself felt the fracture. Staff whispered of tensions, relatives smirked with satisfaction. To them, the boy was finally losing his place, slipping back into the shadows where he belonged. But beneath their glee, there was unease, for they, too, saw the quiet strength that still lived inside him. One evening, after another tense day filled with silence, Obinna entered his room and stared at the suitcase by the wardrobe. His chest ached, his mind restless. He could not live in the half-light of truth and silence any longer. Slowly, deliberately, he began folding his clothes. Each shirt, each book, each memory was placed carefully into the bag. His movements were not rushed, but steady, like someone who knew a chapter was ending. When the zipper finally closed, the sound echoed in the vast, lonely room. He stood for a long moment, staring at the life he was leaving behind. And then Obinna, The boy who had once climbed into a broken bus for shelter lifted his bag and walked out of the mansion. The mansion gates closed behind him with a quiet clang, but to Obinna it sounded like thunder. For a long moment, he stood still, staring at the familiar streets beyond Banana Island. The world of chandeliers, marble staircases, and gold-rimmed cutlery was behind him. Before him stretched Liana, the city that had once nearly swallowed him whole. But this time, he was not the same boy who had entered that broken bus searching for shelter. He carried something with him now: knowledge. Chief's lessons on money, risk, and resilience lived in his mind like fire. He might have left the mansion, but he had not left what he had learned. Back on the streets, he refused to be broken. He found a cramped room in Surulere to rent, paying with the little money he had saved from allowances. The mattress was thin, the air hot and stuffy, but he was grateful it was his space, his beginning. He started small. With the sharp eye he had developed under Chief's guidance, Obinna noticed the piles of discarded electronics in street markets. Old phones, broken laptops, gadgets thrown aside by those who could afford replacements. To others, they were trash. To him, they were opportunity. He bought a cracked smartphone for almost nothing, tinkered with it late into the night, and managed to get it working again. The next day, he sold it for double what he had spent. With each repaired phone, he gained not only money but confidence. Soon, word spread among local traders. The boy who fixes dead phones. His hands grew skilled, his eyes sharper, his patience deeper. Within months he had more orders than he could handle, but Obinna knew repair work alone would not carry him into the future. He began frequenting Liana tech hubs, small co-working spaces filled with ambitious young entrepreneurs, coding apps, designing websites, and pitching to investors. At first, he lingered quietly in corners, absorbing conversations the way he once had absorbed Chief's lessons. He listened to their talks of startups, digital platforms, and e-commerce. He asked questions, humble but eager, and slowly became part of their circles. His discipline and humility set him apart. While others boasted of ideas they never pursued, Obinna worked relentlessly. He studied online courses late into the night, his phone glowing under the dim light bulb of his rented room. He scribbled notes in old exercise books, planning, testing, revising. Soon, his vision sharpened. A platform that would connect small traders to wider markets, bridging the gap between informal street vendors and formal digital commerce. It was not flashy, but it was practical. And in Nigeria, practicality could change lives. He registered a business name and found a tiny shared workspace where he could work. The room had flickering lights and unreliable internet, but it was alive with ambition. Surrounded by other dreamers, Obinna built his startup brick by brick, coding, networking, pitching. The road was brutal. He faced betrayals from supposed partners who tried to steal his ideas. Promises of funding evaporated after endless meetings. Investors sneered at his background, dismissing him as a busboy with fantasies. Nights of hunger returned, and some mornings he doubted if he had been foolish to leave Chief's mansion. But each setback carved him stronger. Each failure taught him patience. Each betrayal hardened his resolve. In the quiet of his struggles, Adadora appeared. She came secretly, away from the prying eyes of relatives. Dressed simply, she would slip into his small workspace and watch him typing furiously on an old laptop. "You're stubborn," she said one evening, her voice half admiration, half scolding. "I have to be," Obinna replied. She smiled faintly, her eyes lingering longer than before. She encouraged him, challenged his ideas, and sometimes simply sat beside him in silence. Her presence was a reminder that he was not entirely alone. Gradually, his persistence began to bear fruit. His startup gained traction among small traders eager for visibility. Investors who once dismissed him started noticing his consistency. Blogs began writing about him, dubbing him the street boy innovator. His story rising from a broken bus to building technology captured imaginations. He was invited to speak at small conferences, his words raw but inspiring. He told audiences, "It's not where you sleep at night that defines you, it's what you do when morning comes." The applause was loud, but inside he knew he was only at the beginning. Then, one evening, as the sun bled red across the Liana skyline, Obinna sat in his shared workspace reviewing emails. Among the usual rejections and inquiries, one message stood out. It was from a powerful investor, a name he recognized instantly, someone whose empire stretched across Africa, whose decisions could make or break fortunes. The message was brief but life-altering. Let's meet. I believe your idea has the power to reshape markets. I am interested in investing. Obinna's hands trembled as he read it again. The boy who had once wandered the streets barefoot, who had begged for shelter in a broken bus, was now standing at the edge of a future so vast it terrified him. This deal could make him a billionaire. The investor's deal became the ignition spark. Within a year, Obinna's startup transformed from a struggling idea in a shared workspace to a thriving enterprise. What began with refurbished phones and small traders evolved into a sophisticated platform that bridged Liana's sprawling informal markets with global buyers. Vendors who once struggled to sell beyond their stalls now reached customers across Nigeria and beyond. His company revolutionized logistics and e-commerce, solving the long-standing chaos of delivery delays, missing parcels, and lack of trust in online transactions. With innovative tracking systems, affordable rates, and a network of local riders, Obinna turned chaos into order. His platform grew viral not just in Liana but in Abuja, Port Harcourt, and even Accra. The media seized the story. Headlines blazed across newspapers and online platforms. From broken bus to boardrooms, the rise of Obinna, the street boy innovator. Young CEO redefines African commerce. Television stations sought interviews, his voice echoing across living rooms nationwide. He spoke humbly, always circling back to his roots. "I was a boy with nothing," he said in one interview. "But Nigeria is full of possibilities if we dare to believe in them." But while Obinna's star ascended, Chief Kenechukwu's empire wavered. Rivals circled like vultures, exploiting every crack in his defenses. Contracts slipped from his grasp, allies distanced themselves, and whispers of his declining health eroded confidence. Once feared and admired, Chief now seemed vulnerable. The inevitable collision came at a dramatic international business summit held in Liana. The event glittered with wealth billionaires in tailored suits, politicians cloaked in power, international investors scanning the future of Africa's markets. Obinna, now commanding his own team of executives, walked into the hall to a wave of recognition. Cameras flashed, journalists called his name, and then he saw him. Chief Kenechukwu, seated at the front, flanked by longtime allies. His presence was still formidable, but Obinna could see the weariness etched into his face, the weight of battles fought too long. For a suspended moment, the room seemed to blur, and only the two of them remained, mentor and protege, teacher and student, past and present, colliding. Their eyes met. Chief did not smile, nor did he frown. He simply inclined his head, an acknowledgement of a truth both men could not deny. They were now equals. The summit unfolded with speeches and presentations. Obinna's delivery electrified the room, blending vision with realism. Investors leaned forward, captivated. When Chief spoke, his voice carried authority, but the contrast was stark. He represented a legacy, while Obinna embodied the future. The tension between them rippled through the audience. Whispers filled the hall. Has the student surpassed the master? Afterward, Chief kept his distance, speaking only briefly to associates. Obinna longed for a word, a sign of reconciliation, but none came. Their silence was louder than applause. Meanwhile, Adadora openly supported Obinna. At interviews and gatherings, she praised his brilliance, her words sparking outrage among relatives who saw her loyalty as betrayal. "You dare to stand with him against your own blood?" an uncle hissed during a heated family dinner. Adaora's reply was calm but cutting. "I stand with truth, and I will not apologize." Her defiance only deepened her bond with Obinna. In public, her presence at his side silenced critics. In private, it gave him strength, but it also fanned the flames of resentment within the family. Obinna's influence spread beyond Nigeria. Invitations poured in from Dubai, London, and Johannesburg. He signed deals that expanded his company's reach across continents. Magazines featured him on glossy covers, hailing him as a new face of African entrepreneurship. The boy who once cowered in the rain was now shaking hands with international billionaires. Chief's relatives, once smug in their certainty that Obinna was nothing more than a passing charity project, realized too late that he had become untouchable. The empire they feared he would infiltrate was no longer necessary. He had built his own. Yet beneath the triumph, Obinna carried a quiet ache. He longed for Chief's recognition, for a reconciliation that remained elusive. The man who had first seen him in the shadows of a broken bus now seemed farther away than ever, separated not by walls but by silence. Then came the night of the gala. It was an evening held in Obinna's honor, celebrating his company's milestone expansion into Europe. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, gold drapes, and tables laden with fine wine and delicacies. Business leaders toasted his name, cameras flashed endlessly, and speeches praised his vision. Chief was there too, seated in a reserved section. Though his body seemed frailer, his aura remained commanding. At one point, their eyes met across the hall. For a brief moment, Obinna thought he saw pride flicker in the older man's gaze. Then, it happened. As the applause swelled, Chief rose from his seat. He took one step forward, then another. And suddenly, his body faltered. His hand clutched his chest. His knees buckled, gasps erupted. The room descended into chaos. Chief Kenechukwu collapsed on the marble floor of the gala held to honor his protégé. Chief Kenechukwu's collapse at the gala marked the end of an era. For days, Liana buzzed with speculation, headlines flashing across every screen, industrial titan fights for life. But despite the best doctors and the frantic prayers of his household, the great man slipped away quietly in his sleep. No final speech, no dramatic farewell, only silence that left behind a storm of questions. News of his death spread like fire. Tributes poured in from across the nation and beyond. Newspapers hailed him as a visionary, a titan who had reshaped industries and opened doors for generations. Yet behind the public praise, whispers grew louder. Who will inherit his empire? What becomes of the fortune he built? His funeral was a spectacle. The streets leading to the cathedral were lined with convoys of black SUVs, their polished surfaces gleaming under the harsh Liana Sunday. Governors arrived in agbadas stitched with gold, senators in flowing attire, billionaires in tailored suits, and dignitaries from abroad. Helicopters hovered above as mourners filled the grand hall, their voices hushed but their eyes watchful. Obinna stood at the altar, his suit sharp yet his eyes red from sleepless nights. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped forward slowly, the weight of memories pressing against his chest. For a long moment, he could not find his voice. Then, as silence deepened, he began. "I first met Chief on a rainy night," he said, his voice trembling. "I was a boy with nothing, searching for shelter. I climbed into a broken bus, hoping only to escape the storm. But inside that bus, my life was rewritten." His voice broke, tears streaming freely. "He gave me food when I was starving, wisdom when I was lost, and dignity when the world called me worthless. Chief did not just give me shelter, he gave me sight. He showed me what a man could become, even when the world says you are nothing." The hall was silent, the weight of his words sinking into the hearts of all present. Adadora, seated near the front, wiped tears from her own eyes, her gaze locked on him. But outside the cathedral's sacred stillness, war brewed. Rivals and opportunists, smelling blood, began circling Chief's empire. Some claimed debts were unpaid. Others filed suits over properties and contracts. Relatives sharpened their knives, insisting that inheritance belonged to blood alone. It was during this fragile time that Obinna made his stand. No longer the timid boy mocked as busboy. He returned to the boardrooms, not as a charity case, but as a man of strength. His voice, once hesitant, now carried authority. Investors listened. Rivals who had once dismissed him found themselves cornered by his vision and alliances. When they accused him of overstepping, he replied calmly, "I do not stand here by chance. I stand here by work, by knowledge, by integrity. Chief believed in me not for blood, but for what I have built." His words silenced many. His achievements spoke louder than any rumor. Beside him, Adaora stood unwavering. No longer the mocking daughter who once sneered at his mistakes, she now walked at his side, her loyalty a shield. Their bond, forged in conflict and softened in vulnerability, blossomed fully into love. Together, they became a force, two souls carrying the weight of legacy not with bitterness but with resolve. In time, Obinna made a decision that stunned Liana society. He merged his own booming empire with Chief's, uniting the old guard and the new. The press hailed it as a masterstroke, tradition meeting innovation, legacy joining future. The Kenechukwu Obinna conglomerate became one of the most powerful business entities in Africa. But Obinna did not forget where it all began. Months later, he returned quietly to the mechanic's yard where the broken bus still rusted, half swallowed by weeds. Standing before it, memories flooded back the rain, the hunger, the fear, the voice from the shadows. With Adaora beside him, he purchased the land and had the bus restored. Its frame was polished, its windows replaced, its seats mended, but one corner was left untouched, scarred as it had been, to preserve the truth of his beginning. The bus became the heart of a foundation he established for street children, a place where boys and girls who had once been invisible could find shelter, education, and hope. He named it the Shelter of Destiny. On the day of its inauguration, children played around the restored bus, their laughter rising above the hum of Liana traffic. Obinna stood watching, Adaora's hand in his heart swelling with both gratitude and sorrow. That night, as he gazed at the glittering Liana skyline from the balcony of his penthouse, he whispered to himself, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. I entered that bus as a boy with nothing. I left it as a man with destiny. The words carried into the night, lingering like a promise, an unbroken chain between past and future, between hunger and abundance, between a broken bus and a billion-dollar empire. Every like, comment, and share helps keep stories like this alive. Join the conversation below, tell me what touched you most, and subscribe for more powerful dramas every week.